when we went to see Anora at the cinema, the BBFC classification comes up on the screen, and not only does it say 18 certificate, 15 certificate, it gives you a little summary of why they came to that decision. And for Anora, they classified it as, I quote, strong sex. And I would love to know, like, where the adjective strong comes from. It's like, in my mind, do they have puny sex as well? Average strength sex, medium sex. So I don't know why they've arrived at the particular strong.
Wow. Well, I suspect the pornographers would disagree, right? The professionals probably consider that pretty weak sex.
Yes. They're all saying, yeah, hold my beer or hold my something anyway, yes. Strong feels like the wrong word. It's like, is it sex in a gym or something? They're like bench pressing or something? What is
that would have been good. Bench pressing sex. Welcome and thank you for landing at the Two Real Cinema Club. My name is Andres Lorente.
And I am James Ruzicka. Happy Christmas. It's our Christmas episode. And every episode we watch two movies. We watch a new movie and we watch an old movie. And we compare A with B. And Christmas time now. Yep, so this episode released on Christmas Day, our Christmas present to you. In the past, we have celebrated Christmas by watching Your Christmas or Mine.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
It's a Wonderful Life. Last year, we did The Holdovers, which is a future Christmas classic. This year, we're more or less sticking with tradition by watching two films about sex workers.
Yes.
Wait, what? Wait a second. How we seem to have missed the festive bandwagon this year. Wait a second.
No, I think Anora takes place around the holidays, doesn't it? Isn't that a New Year's party?
Yes. I eat my words. It is a Christmas film.
I think it's in between.
You're right.
Yeah,
you've saved my mistake. You've pulled it out the bag. So this week we have watched Anora.
A Christmas film.
New Sean Baker film, a Christmas film, which is currently tipped for a lot of awards, actually. Yeah. So it's had a lot of critic praise. And then we are comparing it to 1967's Belle de Jour, first appearance by Luis Buñuel on the podcast. Two films about sex workers, one of them a bit festive. Good fun.
Yeah.
Now, have you seen Sean Baker's previous films?
I saw The Florida Project.
Okay, right.
A couple of years ago, which I really enjoyed. I'm IMDbing right now just to make sure.
The only one of his films that I am aware of. See, I've seen none of them. As usual, you've seen all the films and I haven't. The only one I'm aware of is Tangerine, and the reason that stood out to me was because at the time it was widely publicised by explaining that the film had been made, all shot on an iPhone. In fact, on an iPhone 5, I think. The whole film made on what now appears to be a ludicrously old, clamped-out iPhone.
I think I have seen Tangerine. That's a sex worker film, too, or is that a...
It is.
Transgender,
I think it is, yes.
Yeah, transgender sex worker or something like that. Yeah, okay. I have seen that one.
So like these sort of outsiders and people who are usually not kind of welcomed by society, often the subjects of his films.
It's funny, I have an iPhone 7 and I can't imagine making a phone on it. It's so lousy. Did I say iPhone? I have a smartphone. 7 through. I'm just so scared of saying stuff on the podcast now. I'm going to really keep quiet. This is going to be like a one-person podcast from now on. We
might talk about this at the popcorn counter next week. So we are very aware of censorship. Also, we shouldn't be talking about the iPhone until Apple pays to talk about it, frankly.
That's true too.
So Anora, the coin has landed on your side.
It has.
What do you want to tell us about it?
I'll tell you a quick synopsis of it, I think, yeah.
Okay.
You gotta wait for the music, though. There's this music thing that happens.
Here comes the music.
Okay. Anora opens on a line of lap dances happening in a very dark strip club.
It's not just a line of... It is literally... It's a queue of butts, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic.
That very opening shot, I did worry, have we gone to see the substance again?
Yes.
It's a queue of butts.
It's
Continue.
An impressive opening shot. Anora is a New Jersey sex worker with a Russian grandmother. So her understanding and fluency of some Russian helps her gain the job of entertaining these wealthy Russian customers. She's a specialist, I guess. She meets Ivan, an ultra-rich but very young Russian Nepo baby with whom she develops some chemistry.
Yeah.
And after their relationship develops in the bright light outside the dark nightclub, in his modern, super outfitted mansion, where he parties with his Russian and local friends, he offers her $15,000 to be his girlfriend for a week of sex, drugs, and travel, which ends with the couple married in Las Vegas. Anora decides to quit her lucrative dead-end job and moves in for the married life with Ivan. But when his parents in Russia discover that they are married, will Anora be the pretty woman married happily ever after, or will her fantasy bring her back down to the earth of her noisy Brooklyn neighborhood with her dreams of wealth and luxury along with it? Or will Russian stereotypes, coupled with sex worker stereotypes, carry Anora's story into exciting new territory with surprise endings sure to awe audience and awards committees all over the world?
Always end in a question.
No, those are hypothetical questions, I guess. Yeah,
maybe we'll answer them, maybe we won't. So I probably, like you, went into the film aware that there was a great deal of awards buzz. A friend of mine who had seen it told me, this film is absolutely brilliant. Lots of critics have chosen it as favourites. So I was expecting, to be wowed and impressed. And for about the first half an hour, yes, I was a bit worried.
Ooh.
Insofar as, like the film starts out with a queue of butts, and there are a lot of scenes of lap dances and people hanging out in clubs. And it starts out with me feeling, a little bit like, is this film a bit too male gazy? And then once you start to see the romance, I'm going to use that word advisedly, between Ivan and Anora kind of develop. I'm guessing this is deliberate. I had these strong vibes that we're going to get, stripper film type A. It's going to be that she's mixed with some wealthy Russian, and then some gangsters are going to turn up, and we're going to have to watch 90 minutes of big burly Russians being violent towards this small vulnerable woman. It's going to be a big tragedy, and someone's going to get shot, and it's going to be kind of like a modern take on Romeo and Juliet. And certainly for the first 30 or 45 minutes of the film, that really feels like the direction that the film is pushing in. Mm-hmm. And so I was, for that first half hour, 45 minutes, a little bit skeptical and a little bit worried. And then at about 45 minutes in, and not before, I would say, the film suddenly declares what its tone is going to be. And that, I think, is the big kind of turning point for the film. And after that, I felt like I was much more in safe hands and started to really kind of settle in and enjoy the film. But I don't know whether whether you had the same kind of experience. We might ring the spoiler bell in a minute, or whether you felt that those first 30 or 45 minutes were congruent with the rest of the movie.
Good question. I think I had the opposite experience.
Oh.
I think it was...
I like it when we argue.
Yeah, well, I think it was fairly sure-footed until a long second act that I just thought went the wrong way entirely. I think it... Are you alluding to the fact that this might be another comedy that's not funny, or...
Well, insofar as we'll ring the spoiler bell in a minute, but there is a scene with the baptism, which is suddenly a pretty raucous comedy moment.
Yes,
and I think that's suddenly when the film it switches from second gear into fourth.
Yeah,
and it's like it's saying, okay, we've found our direction now.
Yeah,
I'm going to put my foot on the gas. this is the direction we're driving in for most of the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And I was pleasingly wrong-footed.
Oh.
I was happy to be surprised that what we were going to see now was actually not the same thing that I was expecting after watching that first half hour.
Yeah.
We weren't going to get Romeo and Juliet. We were going to get something which was a bit more like, if anything, I was struggling to figure out what this film is like, and it mostly reminds me of After Hours, that 1985 Martin Scorsese film. I don't know whether you've seen that.
Love that film.
Griffin Dunne and Rosanna Arquette, they spend, or it's Griffin Dunne spends like a crazy night in New York, going from one destination to another, looking for, I think it's his wallet, isn't it? I think, but it's it's kind of city-based road movie encompassing all these crazy characters.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this film sort of reminds me of, and it was not what I was expecting after that first half hour.
Yeah. I would say that there's some tonal, the tones change so much between all three acts that for me, it's a little messy. So I've read in some other reviews recently that it's considered a comedy of sorts, and there are some comic moments, but they seem so out of place, and they feel like they kind of undo a lot of the dramatic tension. But it's kind of a confusing film. It's not an easy film. But I'm looking forward to talking about it more. And if we could talk openly after a spoiler bell, that might help.
Is there anything you want to cover before the spoiler bell? Otherwise, we'll ring it now.
I don't think so. I think it's best that we spoil it.
I've only got one sort of non-spoilery thing to say, which is... and it's a spoiler insofar as this is only the conclusion that I can comfortably reach at the very end of the film. Maybe it's hinting at it in the first half hour, but my thought is that there is a reason why this is an eponymous film. This film is named after Anora because Anora is a great character. Clearly it's her movie, it's her blooming name on the poster, but she is a great character. And all great film, great fiction is about great characters. She is a really fully realized character, not kind of sugar coated. She's, I think, considerably more fully realized than anybody else who's on the screen with her. I think she's a great character, very watchable. There is a reason why Mikey Madison, who plays her, is the one who is largely being singled out for awards. She apparently is best known for a Louis C.K. sitcom called Better Things, which I have never heard of. Have you seen or encountered this?
No.
So, apparently this is the thing that she is largely known for from people who watch TV. I've never seen it. So she's brand new to me. I thought she was great, but she's given good material to work with, I think. She's a good character. Yeah. Shall we ring the... Oh, yeah?
I would agree with you, but I also think this film could have been called Where's Ivan or Where's Waldo? And I think for a long section of this film, this is not about her, really. And I think that's another tonal confusion for me, and I think it's a mistake. But let's get into it after the spoiler bill. Yeah.
Let's, as all the best YouTubers say, let's get into it. Yes, I might also debate some of those conclusions with you. Okay, let's ring the bell. Ring the bell. Even above the deafening sound of all those 808 bass drums in the strip club, you can still hear the spoiler bell, can't you? That's still loud and clear.
Absolutely.
Okay, spoil away.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, the marriage doesn't go well once his parents find out about it in Russia. So they're on their way to annul it, and they've got this character he's like is it Russian Orthodox priest or something like that? But I think he's actually Armenian.
I guess so. Yes.
Yeah.
He's Toros, isn't it? That's it.
Toros, yes.
I think he's the priest.
Played by someone named Karen Karagulian is Toros. Mikey Madison, as you mentioned, was Nora. And he's kind of like a fixer, I guess. I always think of George Clooney as being the classic fixer in his film there with someone called
it's another eponymous
name, exactly. Something Gray. Michael Gray, no. Anyway.
Michael Collins.
No. Oh, God.
I can look it up.
Someone should have a podcast about films or something like that. Don't really know what they're talking about. Anyway, so Toros is really active in trying to annul the marriage. So the whole second act is sort of the time that it takes the Russian parents to get to New York, and Toros trying to annul the marriage. But of course, Waldo, I call him Waldo because
well, Michael Clayton, by the way.
Michael Clayton, there you go. Ivan takes off. He escapes the mansion where he's
Waldo, I think, is a better name, actually. Yeah. Yes.
And then for me, it just becomes a little ludicrous because we do get this scene where Toros has sent over Garnik, I think who's his brother or something like that, and Igor, a couple of like Russian heavies to sort of sequester Ivan and Anora in the house and keep them there until the parents come and fix everything. But Ivan takes off. And what happens is a fairly rough scene of sort of kidnapping and tying up and gagging Anora in this house, this mansion where Ivan lives. Presumably it's his parents' New York house, whatnot. And we get this middle scene that is very, very long, and it sort of melts into this Where's Waldo journey where they look for Ivan by looking in all the wrong places first before making the logical decision to go back to the nightclub where he met Anora. And for me, it was just a lot of energy was lost. Like I felt like they captured most of the strip club scene, the sex worker scene. They got her life in there, and they did a pretty good job in that first act. So my feeling is like I think they were on the right track for that part of the film. I thought the first act was not super original, not incredibly enlightening or cinematic, but it did its job of setting up a story. And then I think the biggest problem with this film, is the wrong person gets away and the wrong thing happens. I think it'd be much more interesting if Anora is the one who gets away. She's got the ring, she's got the money, she's got the marriage certificate or whatnot, and I think that makes for a much more interesting film. But instead it's Ivan, who's this spoiled, drunken, young Russian guy who's just going to go out and party all night long, and it becomes kind of ludicrous because it seems like they should be able to find him a lot easier if his world is that small within Brooklyn and whatnot. So I think the wrong character gets away, and I think as a result, Anora becomes literally gagged in the second act of the story. And there's a long time where I really don't think it's Anora's story. For that entire 2A, 2B section, I don't think it's really Anora's story. I think it becomes much more about the Russian heavies. I think it becomes much more about Ivan, who's not even visible in that part of the film. And for me, that was just a mistake. I think that's the biggest mistake for me. So after that, I wasn't terribly interested in the film. And it's long. It's 2 hours, 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's too long. It is too long.
And there's this directorial giveaway that Igor is going to become an important character. He's really a minor character because he's the one who's just like the day hire to be a heavy and sequester her in her house there. But in a film that has very few rack focuses, there are a couple of rack focuses on Igor where he's suddenly out of focus, but then he's up. He's clear. He's the focus of the camera for a couple of moments, and you're thinking, okay. So for me, that's a giveaway. So I realized that he's going to become a much more important character than the original sort of billing. But I'd love to hear from you for a little bit, because for me, this film falls apart once they get into the house living happily, but ever after, and then Toros shows up, and I think kind of makes a mess of it.
See, I'm gonna argue against your suggestion there, because I think while Ivan is like the subject of the plot during this long search for him across Brooklyn or across New York, I think still Anora is the subject of the story. I think what we are watching, what we're intended to be interested in, and what I think I was sort of interested in, was the way that she reacts to this stress. I mean, it's that classic screenwriting convention, isn't it, that you make things as hard as possible for your lead characters, and that's kind of what they're doing. I don't think Ivan is a particularly interesting character. No. I mean, just like you say, he's not particularly rich or well drawn. I've seen a little YouTube video of the actor who plays him, and in my brief assessment, I don't think that guy's acting at all. That guy's just that guy. Yeah. I'm going to have to look up the name of the actor who plays him. Mark
Edelstein.
Edelstein. he just seems to be playing largely himself on screen, and he's kind of cute and watchable and very, very youthful looking, but he's not a particularly interesting character in this film. No. And I think there's a moment of choice, isn't there, where he runs away, and we could have chosen to pick up the camera and follow him and see what he chose to do, but I think that would be a lesser film. I think seeing what happens to Anora and how she copes with what she is put through, I think is much more interesting. So I personally feel like they made the right choice there, but I cannot disagree that the film is too long. So it's 45 minutes too long, probably. They could easily have chopped 30 minutes. There are many scenes which, as far as I am aware, were filmed guerrilla style. They went to a whole bunch of genuine restaurants and genuine clubs and filmed genuine people and showed them a picture of an actor on an Instagram page and said, "Have you seen this guy? Have you seen this guy? I'm looking for this guy." It must have been a nightmare of getting post facto release forms signed, because I think there are a lot of members of the public in those scenes who are either in the background or the foreground. And a lot of those scenes, I got the idea quite early, and I probably didn't need to see any more of them. And what was most interesting was the way that Anora was constantly trying to change her tactics to win the game. It's not that she has chosen one route and she's going to stick to her guns. She tries everything, doesn't she? She kind of tries to persuade them. She tries to be nice. She tries to be nasty. She's self-controlled. And I think a lot of that is about her journey to the final scene, which we will probably talk about shortly. Yeah. But I found watching her cope with what was happening and duck and dive and adapt and change was much more interesting than watching Ivan, who is a bit of a child who goes off and does childish things and trying to get himself out of trouble by pretending that it's not there. Yeah. She's the character. I mean, she's the eponymous character. Yep. She's what we've she's what we've paid our money to see.
Yeah, I just think that if they had to look for her, it would be much more interesting, because I think you'd get to see her world a lot more. You'd get to see her using her wits, and you'd get to see the Russian heavies really make a sincere search for someone, as opposed to this very, very kind of lame and gag-filled hunt for him. And I think it just gets a little lazy in that second act, when I think it could have been much more interesting. I mean, there's one of the scenes I think you're talking about when Torres goes into this like dance and dinner supper club kind of thing, and he's showing all these old people who definitely don't know who this guy is. He's showing their photo on his phone. It's just, it's kind of ludicrous. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, and it becomes sort of what is it, Keystone Cops like.
Yes.
And I think that it's a strange tone shift, and I think the film, kind of like Yvonne, just gets lost right in there for a long time. So yes, I agree with you. She's sort of using her wits, and sometimes she's violent, and sometimes she's very, very cerebral, and she's trying to get out of her situation. But at the same time, she is locked into a space. This becomes kind of a chamber film in the house for quite a long stretch. That scene must be 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So it becomes this chamber film where you're just locked into this house, and sure, you get the sense that she's, captured and all that, and she's got troubles piling up, but at the same time, she's not really able to do a whole lot. And I think there's some vomit that makes it funny. There's some blood, whatever, but it doesn't take you very far. And you're wondering, when they finally get out of that house, they seem really ham-handed, the heavy guys, to the point where they're making this fruitless search when you probably go to the strip club first, is my guess. Or you probably go to some, but don't they go to his ice cream shop, his friend's ice cream shop where his friends work? Yes, that kind of makes some sense. Walking around Coney Island, is that just a filmic kind of moment where you get to show Coney Island or whatever it is? And then, of course, ultimately they're told to just try and go to the courthouse and annul the marriage. And then you have these really rich Russian-backed people sleeping in a car on the street. I mean, come on, there's got to be a 5-star hotel around there where they're going to attract less police attention, for example, or be able to put themselves up for the night. So it kind of becomes unbelievable. I realize it's supposed to be sort of this this journey film with a compressed timeline. You mentioned After Hours. After Hours is really interesting because the protagonist goes out and does stuff in New York City overnight. It's a 24-hour timeline, or even less. I think it's from the time he gets out of work until the time he has to show back up for work in the morning. It's a really compressed timeline following that one character and having this just surreal journey through the city. And I think you sort of get these surreal journeys, but much of it's in Vegas. Too much of it is an unsurreal journey in this closed space in the mansion. And then they get back out there, and the surreal journey in the city is not that surreal. It's pretty well expected. So I wasn't surprised at many points. And again, this is probably just too much hype. You go into a film, I can't divorce myself from the hype very often. And Mikey Madison's fantastic. The acting is really quite good. I mean, it's nice to see a New Jersey sex worker who's fluent in Russian. I mean, that's great. That was a lovely surprise, and I shouldn't be surprised that exists. It probably does. But otherwise, I didn't feel a lot of surprises.
There is at least a lot of. I feel like I'm, arguing so enthusiastically for the other side here.
Yeah.
It's not that I absolutely love the film, but I did come out really enjoying it. It's like there's a lot of nice little character detail, I think, where the film kind of like breathes and flexes its muscle. So, I've already said, I think Anora, she is a well-drawn, complex, believable, consistent but not monotone character. But I think a lot of the other characters, for all the fact that they are kind of Keystone Cop bozos, Keystone Cops is the right word, they still have some lovely little character details. Like just the first time when Taurus is introduced and he's doing this kind of Armenian baptism, and he keeps glancing at his phone. I think that's a lovely little character detail, and it's not like he blows up. He's a bit sort of frustrated, and then he has to tell everybody, look, I'm really sorry, I've got to go. Or like the Garnick is like his brother, I think. He's the first guy who goes to ask Ivan, what's going on. And they sort of slightly muscle their way in, but they don't immediately turn up and start beating people in. Well, he just keeps his foot in the door, trying to see Ivan. They're not slick. They're not classic movie gangsters. They're not actually particularly threatening. There's kind of a bit of bluster, but actually they say, we're not going to shoot you or anything. I mean, we're just going to go and go through a legal process. They're real kind of low intensity thugs, aren't they?
Yes.
Which is not the obvious route to take. And I went into this film after half an hour expecting to see high intensity thuggery. In the same way that that the card at the beginning of the movie said strong sex. I thought there was going to be strong thuggery. And they are not. And even I think that the character of is it Igor, that's it. Who is this hired thug. I mean, he is supposed to sort of be Anora's equivalent on the gangsters team, and he is, he is sort of the bottom of the pyramid, and he is the lowest of the low. But he kind of, sort of, has something in common with him, and I don't think they play his character completely right. I think he is probably a little bit too violent towards Anora. I think maybe they slightly missed the tone there. They're trying to paint him as this kind of a basically good guy who's in a tricky situation. And I don't think if he was basically a good guy, he would be spontaneously tying her up and pinning her down quite as vociferously as he does. But they are trying to paint a complex, nuanced, sort of morally ambiguous, but at his heart, a sort of good guy character for her to bounce off. It's not entirely sensible, but I can see what they're aiming for, and they very nearly get there. They're 80% of the way there. It's I think she and he, that's supposed to be the relationship that sort of underpins certainly the second half of the film, and that is the relationship through which she exhibits some character growth. She spends a lot of energy trying to prove that she is better than him, but they have this sort of growing complex relationship, and they're able to actually talk to each other kind of as equals towards the end of the film, although it takes a very long time for her to treat him as a bit of an equal. They're trying to navigate those waters. Is it completely successful? I don't know. Probably not. The film lets him off a bit too lightly, but they're going for something sophisticated and complex. So I take my hat off to them for giving it a good try.
Yes. And I agree with you that each of those characters has a little bit of humanity, which is a nice touch. And this doesn't break out into a Russians pulling out Uzis and shooting at each other, which it very easily could have. In most films, it's going to do that, right? So I think that humanity is great. Those little touches are wonderful. I wish Anora had a few more of them. Actually, we don't really know that much about her outside of her sex work. You definitely get a great sense of who she is, but you know very little bit about her. Otherwise, she seems to live with a sister and the sister's boyfriend or something like that. Obviously, it's a tough life they're living right on the train tracks in Brooklyn. But we don't know a whole lot about her. And, she's human because we see her so much throughout the film dealing with a pretty tough industry and pretty tough clients. But I wish she had a few more touches because the Russian characters are humanized pretty quickly and with just a couple little motions or little motifs, But I think you get a little less of that. And sometimes some of her language is what it makes you not like her so much. She calls Igor a faggot ass bitch a couple of times. And I suppose we should say that, the parents do come. The marriage can't be annulled in New York. They've all got to go to Las Vegas again. So we get another private jet flight out of it. And at one point, Igor says to her, it's a good thing you're not part of the family. So she avoids getting really wrapped into that Russian lifestyle, which is probably a good thing. But they end up going back to when she agrees to annul the marriage in Vegas. Igor sort of escorts her back to New York City. They've got one last night in the mansion, and she's supposed to pack up and leave. She tells him, "You have rape eyes" at one point. And a call back to the faggot-ass bitch moment happens there. And then things get a little wild at the very end. I was a little bit surprised, but we've been talking so much about opening images and closing images. This film ends on a lap dance as well, a very interesting one. Igor has sort of managed to come away with the wedding ring, which is worth a lot of money. It sort of gets lost in a fight or the struggle earlier on, and he's pocketed till the very end. He makes it a gift to her as he's dropping her off at her apartment in the last scene. And then it's a stirring moment because they both get these sort of direct address to the camera, these shots where they're just looking right into the camera. And it's kind of an on-the-nose moment because he's got the wedding ring and he's been made a more important character, a more noticeable character throughout the filmmaking, I think. And you get this feeling, okay, they're supposed to fall in love right now. And one of the connections they have is grandmothers. That's as far as I could figure it out. That he has his grandmother's car, which is a lovely little character detail. It's kind of this beat up old car, but functions, and she's talked about her grandmother being Russian, so there's this grandmother connection moment to a certain extent, and then she mounts him right there in the car. So there's this sex scene to sort of end the film, and she ends up sort of hitting him, I believe, right? She punches him, but it's almost like that's all she's ever known is as using her sex for her living as well as her relationships, I guess. And then the windows wipers are crossing the windshield because it's a snowy day, and the film is just kind of over. So her arc sort of takes her right back to where she was, which is probably the point, and it's kind of sad. But I wonder if it's believable. Like, did you believe that was the right way to go at that point in the film, that they should hook up at the very end and have this broad daylight sex in a car scene? It was surprising, but I'm not sure it was a good surprise for me.
I agree entirely. I think it is the wrong ending. I feel like it's one of those films that ends about 3 or 4 times before they finally plump on one ending, because they could have ended with
Vegas,
kind of like the divorce papers. They could have ended with her getting the cash and spending the night in the mansion. They could have ended with him giving her the ring. And it carries on, and we have another ending, another ending. That said, that final moment. So I feel like that is the moment when she. It changes, but I think this is the first time in the movie that she cries. So she kind of she grinds on him, and and it's like they're sort of starting to have sex, and then she kind of punches him, and then this is like her first moment of like a genuine emotional release. That she's been sort of in emotional control of herself all the way through, and like a really important part of her self-respect was proving that she is better than Igor. All the way through the film, she's constantly trying to make sure that she's not the bottom of the pyramid. There's always Igor who's underneath her.
Yeah. And
then she tries to demonstrate, even at the end, he's brought out his trump card, he's given her the ring. She still has to prove, no, I'm still better than you.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, she can't quite go through with it, and then she has like an emotional release. I agree. I'm not sure it's entirely the right ending, but again, I think they're trying to go for something which is emotionally quite sophisticated, and they're trying to give her a proper moment of genuine vulnerability, which she hasn't had for the other hour and 14 minutes of the film or whatever. This is the moment when the last barrier comes down, and it's like the car that they're in, because the windows are all snowed up. It is like a little private booth they're in. It's kind of like it's reproducing the private booth in the strip club where she goes to grind on people. So it's kind of a return to that world, and yet it's very brightly, uniformly lit instead of being kind of dark and shadowy. It's like an upside down, an inverted world for her. So I think I can see what they were going for. Yeah. Does it work? 50-50. I don't know, but it's a cute idea, and maybe if they got to that moment a little bit earlier rather than ending the film 3 times already, I would have had a bit more patience with it. Yeah. But overall, we've already agreed this film should be shorter anyway.
Yeah, I've written down that there's a 4th act. It felt like there was just, and I don't know that the steam is still in the film at that point. And it's confusing. It's definitely a heartbreaking ending, and in part because you're right, it is probably her biggest emotional moment, and it's just interesting that it ends with sex. I mean, and I'll talk about this with a certain squad we'll call later, but it feels like they had to end with something like that, and I don't think they did have to. I think that was sort of a decision that maybe could have been rethought.
Yep. There are a few little details which amused me enough that I made a specific note about them in my notes here. One of them is just I'm probably very naive about this, but early on in the movie, when we have these scenes of Annie, of Anora kind of plying her trade at the strip club, and she's she knows how to turn on the charm, and she's kind of cute and she's funny. And she says, do you want to go get some money at the ATM? And my understanding, is this right? They have an ATM inside the strip club. Is that right? Because that is genius.
I think that makes sense. A lot of cash.
That's how it works.
Yeah, that's the kind of place where you need a lot of cash, and
But the problem is that in Britain, if you get money out of an ATM, a cash machine in this country, it appears on your bank statement. It says like £50, Wimbledon High Street Co-op or something like that. I would love to know whether these guys are getting $500 out of the ATM, and their bank statement says $500 at Booby's Strip Club, and the wife looks at the bank statement and says, "What's this, darling?"
It's called a point of sale, the POS. Yeah.
If I ran a strip club, then I would make sure that the ATM appeared on bank statements as something like Christian Science Reading Room or something like that. something really respectable.
I think you can do that. Yes, absolutely. You've got a business idea there, my friend. Follow your dream.
And the other thing I noted out, I know we've kind of talked about it before, which was the tinsel in the hair.
Yeah.
So she has this kind of tinsel, and for the first half of the movie, it was a while before I realised that it was tinsel. I thought it was that she had a few grey hairs, and I thought that was like a really beautiful little character detail.
Yeah.
I know someone who is young with a few grey hairs in her hair, and it's it's like this sort of physical demonstration of vulnerability.
Yeah.
She is a tough girl, isn't she? And I thought this notion that she's a tough girl, but she's got a few grey hairs. That's I thought that was a lovely outward expression of her inward character. Yeah. As it turns out, now it's a bit of tinsel, isn't it? So I don't think she's supposed to have grey hair.
No,
but it's cute.
But it could represent wisdom or stress as well. I mean, it's
or Christmas. Yes,
or Christmas. It is a Christmas film.
Well, you alluded to a certain squad.
Yes, I did.
Early on. The police never get a Christmas holiday, and it's still true today. Shall we place a special festive call to the Cliché Squad?
Cliché Squad.
Well, you were talking about the Cliché Squad first. What are you going to call the Cliché Squad?
God, I hate to be self-reflective, but I'm beginning to think that opening and closing scenes are a cliché now.
No, but that's our cliche.
Yeah.
We own that. They're going to arrest us.
It's very meta. But boy, yeah, you're right. There's just this line shot of ass after ass writhing on top of a man in the nightclub. And then I thought, boy, this could be the whole movie. That was my first thought, 2 hours, 15 minutes of this. Or we're going to come back to this at the end. And boy, we might see it in another film here today too. But yeah, I mean, it does really underscore the idea that this is something that people do. They bookend their films with kind of an image at the beginning, which really matches the image at the end. And here it's kind of, there's a lot of temporary growth in the character throughout, but then by the very end, she's right back where she was before, which again, as I said, it's kind of heartbreaking for sure. But it satisfies this cliche of opening image and closing image. For me, Russian oligarchs are sort of, I guess it's just a zeitgeist cliche that, they're everywhere and they're vicious, they're mean-spirited, and, they have private jets and heavies. You've got to have a heavy if you're a Russian oligarch. But they're not necessarily competent heavies all the time, I guess. And then the one that I see a lot is blankets on flights. If you want to show that someone cares about someone else, it's because their friend has fallen asleep on a flight, and then they pick up that blanket and just make sure they're warm and tucked into the flight. Seen it a million times. So those are my cliches. Some are rough, some are tumble, and some are just cuddly. But there you go. What about yourself?
That's good. The blanket is a good one. That passed me by. I have also written, are all Russians bad or dodgy?
Yeah.
Because, these kind of the Armenian Russians in this film. I mean, Anora is a rich and complex character. The Armenians kind of less so.
Yeah.
And, they are sort of comedy relief, and I understand that they are less sophisticated in general, but, there's a little bit too many visits to the cliche world for the Armenians. Yeah. The other one that grabbed me was that getting the car towed when they park it badly. I feel like I've seen that in so many movies that, you're on some kind of search and you park your car and you go off and do your important business and you come back and the car is being towed at that very second. Yeah. So you can have an argument with the guy who was towing your car away and saying, oh, no, man, no, please, I only parked here for a minute. Yeah. Oh, you got to get it back from the city council. Yeah. Oh, no, please. I feel like I have seen that film, that scene 200 times.
I've never seen the car driven off the truck, though. That was a first. That was pleasant.
Yeah, it's true. You're right. Yeah. So, car fights back. So, I must say, I came away from this film thinking I thought it was pretty great, actually. Yeah. Not perfect. It's not 10 out of 10, and it's not Citizen Kane, but what is? But Mikey Madison, well done. Complex, nuanced, layered, interesting character. Yeah. No kind of easy outs. There's that. There's a very sweet scene fairly early on in the film where she goes back to the strip club and she says goodbye to everyone. She's cleaning out her locker and she's telling them, so long. And just her. In just a couple of lines, her relationships with her co-workers there seem believable and sophisticated and cute, and she even gets to throw in a little political comment, which we love at the Two Real Cinema Club, about how if the club owner gave her paid vacation and a 401k, then she would be a lot happier.
Loved it.
So there's a lot to enjoy in this film. It's not perfect, but a film doesn't have to be. I came away feeling that it was actually pretty great. Yeah. It probably deserves a lot of these plaudits.
Yeah. Well, and maybe we'll talk about this on a later show, but I think in a fairly imperfect year for film, this one does stand out. Yeah. And it gets vaping culture right. I mean, boy, the amount of vaping that goes on. Oh my goodness,
there is so much vaping in this film. It's unbelievable. Yes.
In the zeitgeist. And I think I'm glad you mentioned the community scenes at the nightclub, because those do seem very genuine. And that's, these are people who go through a certain hell together. And there's definitely one character there. Is it Diamond, I think is her name? There's one worker there with whom Anora does not get along at all. But there's also a lot of camaraderie. And I think that is kind of a nice touch. The last thing I'll mention is just about the title. Anora, but she refuses to go by that name. She's always calling herself Annie, right? I think I'm just going to leave that there. That's deep. That's one of those deep things that I've just said. I'm just going to leave it alone.
That is incredibly deep. That's so deep it doesn't require explanation. Why don't we have a break while we ponder that? And then we will come back and talk about another movie about sex workers. This is festive. We'll come back and we'll talk about Belle de Jour. It seems like everything is a subscription these days. Your TV, your shopping, your Spotify, pet food, gym membership, your software, your organic vegetable box, even the heated seats in your car. It all seems too much to keep track of until now, thanks to this week's sponsors of the Two Reel Cinema Club, Subscribulator. For a simple monthly subscription, Subscribulator will monitor your subscriptions, letting you know when you're paying how much for what and how long until you have to pay it all again. On the basic subscription of $10 a month, Subscribulator will look after 5 subscriptions. At $20 a month, the premium plan will look after 9. Or you can pay $35 a month for a gold subscription to look after 7 subscriptions and reduce ads. Or for users who want to avoid ads altogether, you can pay $60 a month for our Platinum service, which looks after 4 subscriptions with almost no ads and reduced tracking. Or go Pro for $80 a month and use Subscribulator Gold Super Plus to look after 3 subscriptions and remove ads from the app homepage entirely mostly. So why wait? Subscribe to Subscribulator today and say goodbye to subscription hassles forever, as long as you subscribe forever. To unsubscribe, phone the supplied number, choose option 4, then option 1, then option 4, and then oh, wait a sec. Oh, it runs out. Did they not send page 2? Okay, so they haven't. It looks like our sponsor hasn't given you all the information about how to unsubscribe, but I'm sure that's not deliberate. Subscribulator. Subscribe now.
Finally, a legitimate sponsor. Oh my God. That is a great idea.
And we are back. Part 2 of our festive Christmas-themed show. We have watched 1967's Belle de Jour by Luis Buñuel. So first Buñuel movie that we've watched on the podcast.
Yeah.
I suspect you have seen more Buñuel movies than I have, because going through the list, so he's made like a bunch of like really important, famous, well-regarded art house films. And I'm not sure I've seen any of them actually. Are you really familiar with his work?
I wouldn't say super familiar, but definitely have seen 4 or 5 of the classics. I think when I was living in London, BFI did a Buñuel thing, and that's where I saw a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah, well
so I've
done.
seen probably, Obscure Object of Desire, Exterminating Angel, Olvidados, Viridiana. I've seen probably 5 or 6 anyway. Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie.
Right.
Yeah. And then, of course, the Chien Andalou, the thing, with the cutting of the eyeball with Salvador Dali. Yeah.
So that is the only other one that I have seen.
Yeah, that's the scene that I don't never want to see again. And of course, if you get your eye... Oh, I've seen Robinson Crusoe, too, which I love.
Ah.
That's a good film. Yeah, Wuthering Heights, maybe. Yeah, so a bunch. Yeah, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10, probably.
So we were trying to figure out during the break which of us chose this movie to pair with Anora, and we still can't quite figure it out. We think maybe it was me, and then you agreed to it, but maybe it was the other way around.
It may have been, but why don't you tell me why I chose it, or tell me why you chose it, I guess. That way we can still call the segment Tell Me Why.
Do you have any other questions for me, Counsel?
There's no shortage of films about sex workers, I guess, and we did briefly entertain the idea of pairing this up with Pretty Woman. But, I haven't seen that film since it was originally out, and I suspect it has not aged tremendously well. And it's not a film that I will put in the classic box.
No.
I'm not particularly familiar with Buñuel, and I was thinking, this is a fantastic opportunity to try and do some catching up. I've never seen Belle de Jour. I want to see it. Good opportunity. And then as we sat down to watch it, I realised, no, wait a second, I recognise every scene. I have seen it before. And yet it occupies this strange dream-like position in my mind, which is unsurprising given the way that the film is made.
Yeah.
I didn't know an awful lot about Buñuel besides the cutting of the eyeball. And, obviously I see that a lot at work every week. So that's not quite as threatening to me as it is to other people. Surprisingly enough, Buñuel was the son of a wealthy businessman. So I didn't know that. Surprising how many people, especially in the early days of the film business, who came from wealthy backgrounds. So he studied agronomy and industrial engineering at the University of Madrid. But while he was there, he became good friends with Salvador Dali, I should say, rather, and Federico Garcia Lorca. So what an incredible sort of early 20th century cultural powerhouse. Just hanging out together at the University of Madrid. So they kind of became this sort of nexus of Spanish surrealism. And then after he was at university, he moved to Paris. He worked with the French director Jean Epstein. His own first film was Un Chien Andalou, made with Dali, which is only 16 minutes long. Fantastic piece of work. Yes, most famous for its image of an eye being cut open, and it's taking full advantage of the Kuleshov effect, isn't it? Where you put two disparate things together, you cut between them, and suddenly you have a story. So it's a picture of a woman having her eye opened, and then a picture of a donkey's eye being sliced open. And yet the cut from one to the other is like this real jolting. Oh my goodness, yes, it does. Even for me, who pokes needles near eyes, on a regular basis, it still does make me shiver a little bit. You're exactly right. Other pictures: Diary of a Chambermaid, Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, Obscure Object of Desire. I haven't seen any of them. I think this is probably his most famous feature film, isn't it? I reckon. Yeah,
very well may be. Yeah, definitely popular, of course, because you get superstar in there, Catherine Deneuve.
She was 22 when they started filming. She was pretty fresh off the back of Umbrellas of Cherbourg.
And I don't know how he got hooked up with Jean-Claude Carrière, but he's a co-writer on this film.
He is, yes.
Obviously living in Paris.
I'm guessing, that once you start making films in Paris, especially if you are a well-known name, that film industry is not enormous. You run into everybody. I didn't realise that the title is a pun on the French term for sex worker, Belle de Nuit.
Oh,
so I think if you're a native French speaker, it's much more clear what the film is punning about. I also didn't realise it's based on a novel. I wish could tell you I read the novel this week, but I didn't.
Oh my God, I thought for sure you had read the novel.
Oh, so embarrassing! I should have read the novel, 1928 novel of the same name by Joseph Cassel.
And in the credits, the opening credits, it says Joseph Cassel, Académie Française, like he's a member of the Academy. Fine literature.
Got to get those credentials in.
I got to say, just for the holidays, how would your parents feel if, you come home from art school or whatever and you say, hey, Mom, Dad, meet my surrealist friends, Federico Garcia Lorca and Salvador Dali. We're here. Let's serve a dinner and see what happens.
They probably seemed like crazy bozos with weird facial hair, though, didn't they? I'm sure they didn't seem like the forefathers of most of British 20th century, most of world 20th century culture.
Yeah.
Well,
I would say this before you tell us a story. Whoever chose this film was genius. Maybe we are both geniuses because I love this pairing. This actually really worked very well for me.
Yes.
I was delighted to go back and see this film.
Yeah, these two pair together very well. Very interesting. I am looking forward to drawing them both together in the synopsis. But first of all, in their synthesis. But first of all, let me chip in with the synopsis.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the story.
Okay.
So, it's Paris, the 1960s. And Catherine Deneuve, fresh from Umbrellas of Cherbourg, made only a year or two earlier, is Séverine. She is the rather bored and emotionally unavailable wife of a successful doctor. As the film opens, they ride in a horse-drawn carriage until the husband tells the driver to stop. That was Freud acting there, wasn't it? Did you hear? I almost said the father.
Yeah,
there's the husband.
Freud is all over this film.
That was Freud leaping right out of my own mouth there. The husband tells the driver to stop. He literally drags Séverine into the woods. He has her whipped. He has her raped, and she wakes up. And this whole opening scene is just Séverine's fantasy. The two live in their comfortable bedroom in their beautiful Paris apartment. Severine is safe, but sexually repressed is what I've written in my notes. I'm guessing that is probably the right word. She is prone to vivid, violent sexual daydreams. So when Severine learns from their mutual friend Renee that someone that they both know is working in a brothel, she finds herself unable to resist going to see what it's like, and soon ends up spending every afternoon there, having sex with clients and finding a strange kind of fulfillment in the work. But will her clients push her too far?
Mm-hmm.
What will happen when one of them forms an emotional attachment to her? And will her husband or the rest of Parisian society find out about her afternoon activities?
Lovely. Some good questions there, yeah.
Good questions, and all of them kind of answered by the movie. There's one of those things that we were repeatedly told at film school was that films are dreams. I think maybe this may be one of the most dreamlike films that I have ever seen. It starts with this kind of daydream. It starts with a dream and a fantasy, and it regularly slips from the fantasy world to the real world and backwards again, often enough, fluidly enough, that I think by the time it gets to the end of the film, there were moments when I look back and I think it's hard to say which is which.
Yeah, I agree with you there, yeah.
So you start with this kind of horse whipping on this rape scene, and that's definitely a dream. They go on a skiing holiday, and that kind of seems real, but then halfway through the film there's a scene where Severine, she's sitting at a cafe and she gets approached by a man and paid to impersonate his dead wife. And I get to the end of that scene and I think, was that a dream? Was that a fantasy? Was that reality? The film doesn't entirely let on which it is. It's deliberately not clear. I think you can read it both ways. So as a result, the whole film becomes very dreamlike. It becomes very seductive. It's a very interesting experience.
Yes, I agree. I think it's this film where everything is really on the nose, which is ironic because it's dealing a lot with the subconscious, I think. Very Freudian film, very 60s film. It's odd. I don't think you could make it today, but at the same time, if someone made it, it would be far more graphic today, I think. But characters very often say these just bizarrely straightforward, hip, philosophical little bits very honestly and earnestly. So the dialogue is very often very much on the nose, and the images are very much on the nose. So it's this sort of revelation of the subconscious very overtly, very obviously. And I think for that reason, it's kind of jarring because you're right. You don't know what is fantasy and what is reality very often. So it's oddly very honest about, very deep sexual thoughts and practices that we have, at least in Parisian society of the late 60s, when Freud was just hot. I think there was a sort of rebirth of the interest in Sigmund Freud at that time, and I think this is a very Freudian film.
It's almost like it's like a checkbox of Freudian tropes, isn't it? Because it's like repressed sexuality. Yep. Take older men, younger women. Okay. Take sex and death. Take the interpretation of dreams. It's like such a big Freudian thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Voyeurism factors in there, isn't it? It's all kind of. It's like a Freud greatest hits compressed into a single feature film.
It really is. Yeah. And did you get the sense that they had a sexless marriage up until this point?
Yes, very, very much so. Okay. Yes.
Which in itself in the late 60s seems unfathomable, but and I guess it takes place in the late 60s. I mean, it's not like it's an earlier period or anything like that. So it just seemed very odd to me. But yeah, in order to get over some of her, and I think they are very much childhood hang-ups that sort of explored. There are these flashback scenes to Severine as a young girl. Perhaps my favorite one is when she's taking the sacrament at the very same time that it's like this refusal of the call kind of moment, but actually full on acceptance of the call. It's intercut with the moment that she sort of decides to become a sex worker. And I think it's her first encounter with a client. So there are these sort of subconscious moments that come, and these memories that come up from her past as well. So you've got dream sequences for sure of her as an adult, but you've also got these sort of flashbacks to childhood, which might explain her frigidity, I think, is what the goal was there in the filmmaking.
Those flashbacks are like they are real flashbacks as well, isn't it? They're really only like 2 seconds long.
Yeah,
they come and go really, really quickly. To the extent that they come and go so quickly, it's almost like you think, did that happen? Did I imagine that? They zip past. They're just tiny, fleeting memories. It is very much a film of its time. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a bit of an insight into cinema's idea of the sexuality of women, or at least society's notion of women's sexuality in 1967.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember being a boy, and this notion that sex was something that men wanted and women tolerated was an extremely kind of common idea.
Yeah.
Like this image of a caveman hitting a woman over the head and dragging her back to her cave.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen that all over the place when I was growing up, this kind of idea of primitive sexual men and women who are their victims.
Yeah.
I think the idea that a woman might enjoy or want sex on their own terms seemed like an exotic and strange idea, I'm guessing, in 1967. It's more especially like the idea that a woman might want a kind of sex which was kinkier than a man's version.
Yeah.
It was probably an impossible idea, I'm guessing, in 1967.
But it's such a zeitgeist kind of film, because what you think of The Summer of Love is 67, something like that. This film was probably made before sexual liberation really had a name and became part of the real zeitgeist of world culture. So it's placed so perfectly, and it's interesting because we do occasionally talk about filmmakers trying to anticipate what's going to be hot in a couple of years, because it takes a while to make a film. So you're sort of thinking, when is this going to be relevant? And this film is very, very relevant just because of its timing is so perfect. And I think it actually sort of precedes what I would consider the heart of the sexual revolution. But I wasn't alive. I was born perhaps as a result of the sexual revolution, but it's just a very well placed film in cinema history, and for that reason, it does. I think probably it's in some ways it's a ridiculous film. It's surreal, so it's supposed to be kind of ridiculous, but it does have in terms of the history of cinema, it holds a pretty big spot.
Yes. It's probably worth talking a little bit about male gaze, I think, in this film, insofar as, Deneuve I would say she is presented for the viewer's pleasure, isn't she, I think, in this film?
Yeah.
I think, the film is not shy about lingering on her body.
Yeah.
And I think, the bodies of the other women in the brothel also are kind of lingered on for the viewer's pleasure. Men's bodies are sort of off limits, aren't they, in this film? We don't really see any naked men apart from her. Should we ring a spoiler bell? Can we spoil the 1967
probably is time
film?
to ring a spoiler bell. Yes,
yeah. Let's ring a spoiler bell before I talk about a naked man's body, just in case people get the wrong idea. Okay, here's the bell. Dear listener, you have been warned. So is it Marcel, I think, is her lover, who is a bit of a hoodlum.
Yeah.
And we do get to see his naked body, albeit briefly.
Yes.
So he kind of takes his shirt off, and although he's thin as a stick, I think he is probably presented for the pleasure of the viewer as well. But the kind of 1960s notion of sexuality is still a little bit. It's still a little bit, I want to say, chocolate boxy, or kind of like cover of a romance novel.
Yeah.
It has that kind of tone, doesn't it?
Yes.
I don't know whether part of that is the colours or the way that people dress, but that's kind of what it reminded me of.
You definitely, yeah. It's talking about Anora, for example, which is so much more graphic. I was talking about this film like it could be made today, but it couldn't be made today. If it were made today, it would be far more graphic. I mean, I think it sort of fantasizes, it's probably not the right word, but it glorifies the life of a prostitute to a certain extent. Like, she does not need the money. They seem to be treated very, very well. The customers are kind of bizarrely inappropriate, but they're never really dangerous, I don't think. And there are a lot of these ridiculous setups. There's the gynecologist who comes and he wants to be spanked or something like that. And, and Severine doesn't know how to do that performance. So they go, Anise, the madame, takes her into another room and takes down the painting or whatnot, and she allows Severine to watch one of the other girls do the role playing. It has a very unrealistic interpretation of sex, especially sex work, I think. So it would obviously be a much darker film, and there'd be a lot more nudity. I think there'd be even more male gaze moments. I mean, there are. She's just sort of. She's even named Belle, beautiful. So she's sort of like the most beautiful, the most elegant of the night workers, or the night beauties, I guess is what they'd be called. And so there's a lot of I think attention drawn to the fact that she's the special one somehow, right? She's the really beautiful one, the sophisticated one. So I think it's very unrealistic in its depiction of sex work. Maybe at the time it was different. I doubt it, but and at the same time, it's kind of realistic about fantasy. That we don't see too many films that play with these sexual fantasy themes, and I think that it's surreal, obviously, but it gives credence to the fact that some of these people have certain sexual fantasies, and they go to a brothel in an apartment in Paris to satisfy them. I think the scenarios themselves are kind of like off the shelf. There's the gynecologist who wants to be whipped. There's the man who wants to mourn his dead wife. They're kind of weird, but they're not necessarily incredibly kinky, I guess.
But then there is one extremely surreal scene. There's a Japanese man he was not speaking Japanese. I'm pretty sure that's not Japanese he's talking. It's just kind of weird nonsense words. And he has a box with something that buzzes inside it. This is kind of one of my questions. Apparently, this is the most popularly asked question about the film. What's in the box?
It's got to be a sex toy.
Apparently, Buñuel, kind of in an interview, said that whenever he meets anybody, he's always asked, "What's in that box?" Then, and his answer was always, "Well, the box contains desire. What do you want to be in the box?" But I don't know whether the notion is, well, actually, the box contains a vibrator, or the box contains it sounds like it's just a bumblebee or something. Yeah, it's curious and strange. And at the end of that scene, so after Severine has had a thorough going over by the Japanese man with the box, the woman who is the maid in the brothel kind of picks up this bloodied towel.
Yes,
and I presume the implication is that he's done her up the wrong and something like that. I'm guessing is that what they're suggesting here,
or a virgin? Or at least
certainly there's been something kind of violent and strange, and yet she has the most kind of dreamy, satisfied expression on her face.
Yeah. Oh, I thought it would be virginity. I think that's the classic cinematic tell for she's lost her virginity and she's discovered sex and she's happy about it. But maybe, you might have a darker idea, or you're going to a different place, I guess. I don't know. That's interesting.
A different but neighboring place.
That's why I was asking you, was it a sexless marriage? Because it seems like they're pretty young. I mean, obviously she's 22 in real life, but playing maybe 25. I don't know. So I was just wondering if it's a sexual awakening for her. There's so much fantasy going on, though. And again, you could even ask the question: was that a real scene, or is that a fantasy scene? Yeah.
Yes. It's so strange.
You can always do that. You can always do that in this film. So, I mean, it all pieces together well. It's what is an hour and 30 minutes. I mean, it's just a nice length. It does what it wants to do. I saw a gorgeous version, a restored version on, I think it was on Netflix, or it was right off one of the streaming services, and looked gorgeous on my new television too. Oh my God. So it was a delight to see it. But there are definitely a lot of odd moments, and I guess it's the whole film is set up like it's a therapy. This is how she's actually going to get well. She's going to be happier. She seems cured by the call girl life. And well, I think maybe you want to talk about the sort of tragedy of the ending, or is it tragic?
Well,
I don't know.
Well, that's a very good question, because is the ending a tragedy? So at the end of the movie, Severine has a regular client, Marcel, who is a small-time gangster. We see him steal a briefcase or a bag of money, something like that, and he's like an enforcer for a slightly more mature, experienced gangster who's a client at the brothel. And so Marcel kind of falls in love with Severine, visits her at her home, he tracks her down, and then he waits for Severine's husband and shoots him. Then goes on the run, gets killed by the police. So luckily, almost all of the barriers to Severine's unhappiness or any dangers to her are kind of rubbed out by the end of the film.
Yeah.
The man who might out her gets killed. The husband who's making these demands that she can't really satisfy or doesn't really want to respond to now ends up in a wheelchair. It's kind of a movie about a woman who gets everything that she wants, but the things that she wants are not what society would conventionally expect her to want.
Yeah.
And the whole movie ends with a repeat of the earlier dream sequence. Mm-hmm. So, just like Anora, we have a mirror-shaped film, an opening scene of Severine and her husband in the back of a horse-drawn carriage. And then at the end of the movie, she kind of has another dream where the husband emerges from his coma, he gets out of his wheelchair, he says something comforting to her, and she looks out of the window to see the same horse-drawn carriage go by, although now it is empty because she is enjoying her fantasy out of the carriage and not in it.
Yeah.
But she kind of ends up in living her best life, but her best life is not what one would expect the best life of the middle-class wife of a Parisian doctor to be. It's subversive and interesting.
Yeah.
Fantastical. Bit weird.
Yes.
Great.
And I think the closing image here makes you really question the veracity of the entire story. It's a little unsettling. It's okay, what happened? Did anything happen? Are they still out in those woods? Did she ever go to those woods? Did she ever leave those woods? Maybe she's always been there, tied up to that tree. It's just... It leaves some mystery, I think. Not in a way that I usually detest an ending like that. I want to know what's happened, but I think it's just a film about thinking about all the moments and how they add up and how they're just all part of a human brain. And I think that's what makes it interesting to me. I like this film. There's a lot of clunkiness too that I did want to talk about a little bit because and I think I want to forgive it because I think it's kind of intentional, but. There's this one scene where she's kind of uneasy about becoming a sex worker, and she drops these roses on the floor. It's just not this subtle image of beauty hidden, falling down, and then right after that, she also breaks a bottle of perfume, and you're wondering, is it intentional or is it an accident? So it's kind of clunky because they're really showing these very obvious things to show her mental state. I guess these are her thoughts, or this is what's occupying her mind, and she's clumsy.
But then earlier on, there's a sort of fantasy dream about her meeting her friends at the cafe at the ski resort. Yeah, and in that, I think one of them breaks a bottle and shows it to her, and I think the implication being that sexual violence or this kind of this very jagged, cutting edge is the thing that she actually desires. Yeah. It's a bunch of images all kind of laid on top of each other, open to interpretation.
Definitely. Yeah, you have to. I think there are, what happens in the dreams always has some, or what we think are the dreams, has some sort of validity or reference to her real life, I think. But like a lot of this, there are a lot of these not very subtle object close-up shots to, tell you what's about to happen. And probably the most telling one is the wheelchair. For some reason, there's an empty wheelchair on the street, and Pierre sees it, and then within 12 minutes, he's in a wheelchair himself. So it's funny because he's sort of at a later stage of his career as a filmmaker, but he's got a lot of these very obvious setups with certain shots that are in close up. So I mean, you could say, hey, it's really great storytelling because he's drawing your attention to something. But I want to forgive it because I think it is kind of intentional. It's like how these objects have a big role in the film, or how they really clearly are trying to communicate something. It feels a little bit clunky until you get used to it, I think. So, I'm not going to say that it's not masterful filmmaking necessarily, but it is very, very interesting storytelling. So I think for that reason, it's just an interesting film for me. I like it for that reason. You're not overcome by these, powerful tracking shots or these lush compositions on screen. It's more about, I'm giving you all these little details that are going to add up to some sort of bigger picture of this woman's inner workings and her mental state. And I think that's what makes it better.
I was trying to summarize what the theme of the film is, because I think that this film is very clearly about desire in a way that Anora is not. That desire is kind of the business of Anora, whereas desire is the inner workings, the motor that drives Severine. I was trying to. So it's something like, it's either that desire comes in many forms, or desire is an elusive and dreamlike thing, I think is what it's trying to suggest. Or maybe the theme of the film is just I read Freud and so should you.
Definitely some of that. Yes.
Did you know there is a sequel to this film? Made in 2006. It's called Belle de Jour.
Oh.
I haven't seen it. I've read the synopsis, and just judging by the synopsis, I think it may miss the whole point of the original film. But it does. But it is an existent thing. It does exist.
So when you said that there was a sequel, I thought it was a setup for a joke. I said, okay, I'm ready for it.
Sadly, no, I am my own straight man. It really is a sequel, but I'm not sure I'll be racing out to watch it. But so, interesting, challenging, dreamlike film. I think some interesting material here to draw together with Anora. But before we do that, I'm going to force you once again, with the threat of a broken wine bottle, to play Who Am I?
Who am I?
Oh, goodness. This is a hard one, because
were there many people you identify with in these films this week? I'm not sure there were for me. So I wrote in my notes a lot of fairly creepy people in this week's movies.
Yeah.
Although kind of that's, I wonder whether at least in Belle de Jour, part of the intention is that we as the audience should wonder whether we sort of count among the creepy people. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to, in the truly British way, I'm going to sidestep any intense introspection.
Okay.
And say if I feel like anybody from either of this week's films, either I am the guy who runs the sweet shop in Anora.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
He's kind of fairly well-natured sort of guy who was just like nodding and smiling along at all the young people's antics, but not really understanding any of it, just letting them get on with it in the sweet shop.
Oh, that's a good choice.
But maybe there is a part of me which sort of sympathises with Igor, who was like the guy who was the hired henchman in Anora. Insofar as I think he does try hard most of the time to do the right thing, but he also gets it wrong most of the time as well. And I can see, I'm the guy who wants to do the right thing but gets it wrong most of the time. I can see that.
Good job. Well, I think more than any other pair of films, this is a good time to practice abstinence. I may abstain from being a character. I love your two choices, though. I like Igor as sort of just this background character, really soaking it all in. He kind of is us, isn't he? Because he's in the story, but he's not in the story. And he's he's not a great good guy, but he's kind of a good guy. So I might lean towards Igor. I did like the character. I found him quite irritating, but he reminded me of myself. I think Usan is his name in Belle de Jour. He's sort of like this pompous friend of the family. He actually encourages Belle to explore the possibility of working as a sex worker.
That guy's a creep.
Yeah, he's creepy. Philosophical, though, and he kind of visits, and it's not clear whether he wants to be with Belle de Jour sexually or he's just checking up on her. And he's also a good friend to Pierre. I feel like he's kind of like this central person, but he doesn't appear a whole lot. He doesn't have a large role, but he's just kind of like this kind of sort of mediocre glue that keeps the whole thing together. So I'm going to say that I'm mediocre glue, and but I'd prefer to abstain.
I think abstinence is very sensible. That's what vaping is all around, isn't it? Yeah, I think yes.
That's right.
Vape rather than smoke.
I'd be the one character who's not vaping in Anora. That would be the other character.
There was one guy in the very distant background not vaping. Right. Well, two films about sex workers. It's Christmas Day. Let's do our synthesis, see what we can conclude from putting them back to back.
See what Santa's left in the stocking. Boy. There's lots of Freudian stuff in Belle de Jour. There's no question about that. And I kind of grew up with that because I grew up with a psychiatrist. We had the big poster of Freud on the wall.
Oh, yeah.
For me, that film really kind of hit home for so many reasons. It's just so surreal. It's so Freudian. It's just so wacky. Catherine Deneuve, the 1960s, Paris. I really gravitate toward the film. Even though, as I said, I don't know that it's one of these great things that should be so highly regarded in the canon. But it does, both the films obviously talk about the agency of women, particularly towards sexuality. But you've got a rich woman in Belle de Jour who's able to just explore it almost to cure herself, right? She gains something out of it other than money versus a less privileged woman in Anora who's really gaining money, has a chance to have the kind of relationship and the kind of lifestyle that Belle would have being married to a doctor, but it's taken away from her. So you get these two very different looks at sexual agency between the two films. I mean, I think, yes, they're both about sex workers, so there's going to be a lot of very on-the-nose similarities, but I think ultimately, for Belle, it's a choice, and for Anora, it's a reality, an unavoidable reality, or seemingly so.
Yeah. I mean, there is no shortage of films about sex workers. My God, does Hollywood like to make films in which most of the women who appear turns out to be sex workers? It's such a common and rather tiresome trope. So nice to see two films about sex workers that treat sex workers as people first and bodies second. That itself, is worthy of note. I've written something pretty similar to what you have said, which is that for Severine, it's about exploration. Yeah, there's a part of her that sort of wants to be punished. She has some degree of self-loathing, but she has a lot of curiosity. I mean, I think in a way, both of these films are about women who not only are sex workers, but on some terms, they both enjoy their sex work in a way. Insofar, Severine is exploring and learning. Anora, I'm not sure that I would say she enjoys sex work so much as she is good at what she does, isn't she? Yeah. I've written here, she's charming, she's skillful, she's not having a terrible time. I like to think of it a little bit like you imagine Anora, someone who works in a restaurant. She enjoys food, she respects food, she understands food. She might not be eating this particular meal for her own pleasure, but she does understand what makes a meal good, and she kind of takes some pride in making a meal well for her customers, even if she herself is not hungry. So I mean, these are kind of both films which are about intimacy, but while Severine is kind of discovering this sexual intimacy, she has this symbol of the bloodied towel, which is her kind of initiation into a world of intimacy. For Anora, I've written here, tell me what you think of this, it's like she wears an emotional condom as well as a kind of phallic one. So kind of Anora wears this emotional condom that only comes off at the very end of the film. Severine's exploration is sexual, whereas Anora knows that sexual world very, very well. Her exploration is of an emotional space instead.
I love that you brought prophylactics into the conversation. I think the Rolling Stones have a song called Emotional Condom, don't they?
Oh, do they?
No, it's Emotional Rescue, but it's a great title. And I've got that image now. That's good. It's funny. She doesn't use a condom in that last scene either with Igor.
Yeah, that's true. Although,
did you think that was
he penetrate her in that last scene?
I wasn't sure. Yeah, I did have that question myself.
I don't know. Yeah,
I'm glad you brought those things up, though, including the emotional condom. But because there's this fantasy thing. I think that Anora's fantasy is a functional fantasy. It's dreaming of being wealthy, having a much better life, And if that's possible through a hasty marriage, like, why not? I mean, if it gets her to a better place, right? Whereas Belle is also getting to a better place, but her fantasy is all about something that she can vary through her own volition. She can fulfill. She's exploring fantasies in order to sort of cure herself, as we said, or change her attitude towards sexuality. And she goes through this. She's trying to get out of this Freudian world of need and repression and all that. So both films definitely deal in fantasy, but one fantasy is a very very independent fantasy that Belle's allowed to have for herself, and one is a sort of fantasy that's sort of been dangled for Anora, I guess, and it's in her mind, but she can't really benefit from the fruition of the fantasy.
I mean, I guess in both films, we as the audience are largely invited to enjoy looking at women's bodies. I think 50 years apart, both films still kind of play that card.
Yeah,
but there's this notion that kind of Severine we're given a backstory for her, aren't we? She has what looks like a history as a victim of abuse as a child.
Yeah.
Whereas Anora isn't kind of super interested in Anora's backstory. It's not really the film doesn't want to explain how she got there.
Yeah.
Insofar as I suppose by doing this, it comments that many women have ended up in the same place, and it's largely due to limited economic opportunities for women.
Yep.
I did a little bit of research. I think in the UK, at least, it's estimated that there are between 50 and 80,000 sex workers. So it's about 1 in 1,000 adults, predominantly women, though.
Yeah.
And these are certainly in the arts, in cinema. The people who are sex workers are commonly portrayed as kind of marginalised, aren't they? Whereas Anora she's in this film, she is an independent woman who is getting hers using the best means that society has allowed her to use to get hers.
Yep.
For all that I was struggling to think of the theme for Belle de Jour, and to me it feels like the theme is just something fairly straightforward, like desire. That's weird, isn't it? Whereas Anora feels like it kind of sets its theme out in that very opening shot. It's about working your ass, isn't it, or working your ass off?
Yeah. Oh, nice.
These are women who are trying to get theirs through the medium that they have available to them, and we can respect her work ethic, and we can respect her personality, and she's able to draw an emotional line between what she does with her body and her brain. Whereas that line is more kind of dreamlike and sort of bizarre and sort of skittered over in Belle de Jour.
Yeah, definitely. I also thought there's definitely an exploration of physical love, especially in Belle de Jour, versus emotional or intellectual love, and she can't have the physical love for whatever reason with Pierre, but they seem to be emotionally and intellectually connected. And then in Anora, it's like she can have all the physical love she wants. It's her profession, right? But she doesn't quite have the emotional or intellectual love, even though I think she's written and played as sort of a smarter character among her coworkers. She asks about, the 401k. I think she understands the psychology of humans better than the other coworkers. She's got this one foil character. It's a friend who doesn't seem to have any aspirations to do anything else. That's what she's a sex worker. She's not drawn as a full character, I don't think, whereas Anora is far more so. And I think for me, that's why having a bit more background on Anora, either, her dreams, what she's planning to do, or a little bit more on what brought her to where she is would be helpful. But, she's really seeking, I think, the comfort of a situation that just gets her out of there. And that's, that in itself shows you that she doesn't really want to do what she's doing. She wants to get out of it, but the means to get out of it and to escape have been dangled before her and then taken away. So, there's definitely, I think there's definitely like a major class, analysis in both of the films, because Belle's well off, Pierre's well off. She's got a lot more independence as a result of that, and the Russians are super well off. And he's marrying. Not only is he marrying an American, but he's marrying a sex worker, and it's someone who's not of their class and of their ilk. So there's definitely status stuff in both stories as well. Yeah, but I think the fantasy stuff in Belle de Jour is just, it's amazing. And she also has the means on the intellectual level. She has the means to explore sex as a way to cure her mind or just improve her mind, heal herself. And I think that's something not available to Nora.
Yeah. So what we're saying is 50 years apart, two films about sex workers, and things have got slightly worse.
Probably. Well, especially if you think if Belle de Jour is the average sex worker in the 1960s and Anora is the average sex worker now, it's gotten a lot worse.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
But the one message I took was don't hook. Bad stuff will happen because either your husband ends up in a wheelchair or you end up right back where you were before.
Well, you say bad stuff will happen, but actually I think Severine she's pretty chirpy at the end of that.
Yeah, she's very chirpy. Yeah.
Just don't hang out with the woman who...
You wonder how healed she is, right? She got her husband into a wheelchair. That's right where she wants him.
Right. Anora, worth going to see. I think it's out on demand now. Actually, it's on video on demand, so you can watch it at home now.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see how that does come award season when it gets in full swing. We have just got enough time to watch to let you know what else has been playing at our theatres.
Why don't you go first while I get this cough out of my throat?
Don't worry, I'll mute those bits out. Okay. We have watched a genuine Christmas film this weekend. Last night or the night before, we sat down to watch Die Hard, which is a Christmas film. 1988, John McTiernan, written by Jeb Stewart, Stephen D'Souza. I was reading a little bit about the background of Die Hard, and a phrase came up which I'd never quite heard before, which really summarises, which is it's like the archetype of the action pictures of the VHS era. That kind of explains what those movies were. It's this is a film which was made to sell many, many copies on VHS, and it did. So this week got the opportunity to introduce it to my son, who is 14. It's rated 18 in this country, but it's violent, but probably no more violent than a Marvel movie. There is a lot of swearing in it, but he's heard that before.
Yeah.
And it's still a real ride. I watched the first half of the film and I was kind of thinking, you know what, God, this film is actually kind of perfect insofar as it's a wonderful piece of clockwork. It's a really beautifully efficient example of storytelling. Everything is there for a reason. Every scene offers you a bit of information or sets something up for later. Nothing is wasted. And then you get to about the halfway mark and things go slightly off kilter. And there are some scenes which seem to slightly come out of nowhere and don't quite fit into the rest of the film. And it looks to me like, maybe everything was extremely slickly planned out until you get to that midpoint, and then things got shuffled around a bit. But you've bought into the characters by that point, and you have the energy to see it right through to the end. It's really obvious watching that film now that Hollywood, after Die Hard, spent 10 years basically remaking it. It's basically a blueprint for so many films of the 90s.
Yeah.
It's so tremendously influential. Still good fun to watch. Still works. I still laughed at the funny bits. Still jumped and kind of felt tense at the exciting bits. It still works. It's a masterclass of its kind.
And it's still Christmas.
And it is still Christmas. It is definitely a Christmas movie.
That came up last night as a possible Christmas film to watch, so I think we're probably going to do it at some point this break. But we watched Just Friends, which is also a Christmas film. Ryan Reynolds, Anna Faris. I love it. It's a guilty pleasure. It's just it's silly, but it's very, very well done. Super pacey. It's just an hour and a half. And really, I saw it years and years ago, and I don't know why. This is not the kind of film I would normally go out and see. But I remember liking it, and it was the first time I'd seen Ryan Reynolds do anything. It's pretty early in his career. It's like 2005, and I still liked it. Good music. It's similarly just not really a moment wasted. Most of the scenes really are relevant and fast. It just moves along. It covers great ground. So I saw Just Friends.
Well, it seems amazing to me that a Ryan Reynolds and Anna Faris movie can be 20 years old. How is that possible?
Yeah. Yep. Just about 20 exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's been a while. Yeah. But it's good. It's good. I recommend it. I recommend it. I saw Memoirs of a Snail. I don't know if you've heard about this one.
I have not.
Which I will recommend, but I was not.
This is the sequel to Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, yes?
No. Yeah, that would make sense. I loved Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, so I would definitely recommend that. 2 thumbs up from my 2 hands. Memoirs of a Snail, I'm going to give 1 thumb up. I liked it. It's beautiful, beautiful animation. It's an Australian film. Sarah Snook from Succession does the voice of the adult character. I think her name is Grace. It's literally a memoir, so it kind of doesn't work because you're shown and told everything simultaneously. So it's a bit of a letdown in that way, but just for the visuals and the sweetness of the story, I definitely will recommend it. It's just that I think it could have been, if you put it in the land of robot dreams or flow and take the language away, I think you'd still get the film and it would be so much more powerful. But she's literally going back through her life almost from the beginning until the present day with images and words. It's kind of just does not follow that rule of get the dialogue out, especially when it's just all expositionary dialogue. So see it, but go in with reasonable expectations.
Okay.
I think the thing I'm most excited about is I finished my solar system documentary, a 5-part series on public television here called, I think it's just called Solar System. The last one was about wandering worlds or something like that, about these.
Now, is that Brian Cox?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, right. Okay. Who's doing that then? Because there was certainly a BBC series.
Oh, really?
With Brian Cox.
Maybe
on a very similar note.
Oh, well, you know what? The thing about these things is they can just put in a different voice and
yeah.
It's really good. But the Wandering Worlds thing talks a lot about the asteroid belt and the Oort cloud. Oh my God, there's some crazy stuff out there. I mean, it's all theoretical, I suppose, but awesome. So watch that. Get your brain food on.
If you want to feel small, then watch that. Yeah. We'll just quickly do the socials on Instagram. We are at 2 Real Cinema Club. Read the blog at 2 Real Cinema Club. Comment on our YouTube channel or email us. We've had some interesting emails lately, actually, which may result in something next year. Yeah. Email us at 2realcinemaclub@gmail.com. Next time, so we're going to talk about a personal anecdote at the popcorn counter next week. Tune in for that.
Oof,
and then the week after that, we are going to be watching...
Donkeys. Hundreds of donkeys.
Hundreds of donkeys. No, wait a second. What?
Wrong mammal. Hundreds of beavers.
Hundreds of beavers. Which has been kind of like 2024's crazy indie hit.
Yeah.
So we're finally catching up with that, and we will be comparing it to...
Beaverland. Is that what it's called? Or Castores?
Beaverland, not Donkeyland.
Tierra de Castores or something like that. I think is it Uruguayan or Argentine? It's a documentary, I think, or kind of on the line of documentary narrative. We've been talking about doing these films for a while now.
We have.
And Hundreds of Beavers is actually I think it was released in 2022 or 2023. So it kind of shows you the life cycle of an independent film. It's probably made a long time ago. It's probably a COVID film and then eventually got released and then got some buzz. So I'm really looking forward to it. These are 2 films about animals. We love films about animals. I think in one film they get killed a lot. The other one they're not. They're the killers. So I'm looking forward to it, and they're not long films. So I think everyone in 2 Real Cinema Club should watch with us.
I think one of them has no dialogue as well. I think ticking all of our boxes.
Yeah. And they're streamable. So community members, watch with us. We'll talk about them on January 6th. Probably release that pod on the 8th of January, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay.
Good. So we'll see you in the new year. Happy Christmas to all of our listeners. Thanks, as always, for joining us on this special family day. And we'll see you with some beavers in a couple of weeks and return next week for a confessional personal story.
That's going to get people anticipating. Happy holidays to everyone.
Happy holidays.